This is not a myth. This is not folklore. This is the true story of a man whose presence terrified emperors, seduced saints, defied poison, survived bullets, and refused to die when death itself came knocking. Grigori Rasputin, a name that still sends shivers through history, conjures images of a wild-eyed monk wielding uncanny power, of forbidden rituals in gilded palaces, and of a death-defying legend. For over a century, Rasputin has been remembered as a debauched mystic who bewitched the Russian royal family and helped drag a mighty empire to its doom. Yet, behind the lurid myth stood a man of contradictions, at turns charismatic and devout, but also cunning, licentious, and shrouded in mystery. He lived during the twilight of Imperial Russia, rising from obscurity to become the confidant of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra. Who was Rasputin, really? To find out, we embark on a journey through the dramatic scenes of his life, from his humble Siberian origins to the opulent court of the Tsars, culminating in a night of blood and intrigue that would cement his legend. Welcome, Crash Global audience. I'm Emily Harrington, and this is a story you will not forget. The story begins in the frozen hinterlands of Siberia. Rasputin was born in 1869 to peasant parents in the tiny village of Pokrovskoye, a place of endless steppes and long, brutal winters. As a boy, Grigori was illiterate and rough-edged, a troublesome farm boy who got into drunken scuffles and petty mischief. Neighbors whispered that even his surname, Rasputin, meant dissolute one in Russian, an ominous hint of the wild life he would later lead. Tragedy stalked his family. Most of his siblings died young, leaving Grigori oddly spared, as if fate had special plans for him. He grew up hard-working, but restless under the watchful eyes of the Russian Orthodox Church, which offered comfort amid the hardships of peasant life. By his late teens, Rasputin was expected to settle into the familiar pattern of village life. He married a local girl, Praskovia, at age 18 and soon became a father. Outwardly, he was just another bearded young peasant plowing fields. But inside, a spiritual turbulence was brewing. He was prone to intense bouts of prayer and flashes of temper. He spoke of visions from God that unsettled those around him. Beneath the dirt and simplicity, something unusual simmered in Grigori Rasputin's soul, a sense that his destiny lay beyond the boundaries of Pokrovskoye. And so, with the turn of the new century approaching, this son of Siberia was poised to abandon everything he knew in pursuit of a higher calling. In 1897, at the age of 28, Rasputin vanished from his village without warning, embarking on a pilgrimage that would transform him. Local lore says he experienced a divine vision. Perhaps the Virgin Mary or a radiant saint appeared in a dream, calling him to serve God. Whatever the spur, Grigori left behind his bewildered wife and young children and trudged across the wilds of Siberia in search of spiritual truth. We see him as a lone figure on endless country roads, clad in a threadbare coat, stopping at every wayside chapel to pray with fervent tears. After weeks of journeying, Rasputin reached the St. Nicholas Monastery at Verkhoturye, a remote holy site nestled in the Ural Mountains. There, he met a renowned elder monk, a starets named Makary, under whose guidance Rasputin underwent a profound conversion. Through months of ascetic living, fasting, praying, and chanting for hours in candlelit chapels, Rasputin cast off his former debauchery like a snake shedding skin. He learned to read scripture, embraced vegetarianism, and forswore alcohol. When he finally returned to Pokrovskoye, he was almost unrecognizable. Gaunt, unkempt, eyes blazing with zeal, he had become a strannik, a wandering holy man, On Sundays, villagers watched in awe and a bit of fear as Rasputin gathered a small circle in his father's root cellar for mysterious prayer meetings. They sang strange hymns and spoke of personal revelations. Rumors spread that female followers ritually washed Rasputin and that he had joined a secret sect whose rites mixed ecstasy and sin. There was suspicion and murmured accusations of heresy, but to many peasants, the once wayward Grigori now seemed touched by God. Word of the wandering mystic began to spread beyond his village, a whisper that would carry Rasputin all the way to the heart of imperial power. St. Petersburg, 1905, the imperial capital, was abuzz with talk of a strange Siberian holy man who could heal the sick and foretell the future. Aristocrats who dabbled in spiritualism and the occult were intrigued by Rasputin's earthy mystique and piercing stare. In grand drawing rooms, lit by crystal chandeliers, society ladies in silk gowns gathered to hear the bearded peasant speak. Rasputin did not look the part of a saint. He was unwashed and smelled of the village. But when he fixed his hypnotic pale blue eyes on his audience and spoke of God's love and personal destiny, many felt oddly transfixed. Among those captivated were two royal princesses, who resolved to introduce this wandering mystic to Tsar Nicholas II and, more urgently, to Tsarina Alexandra, who desperately sought help for her ailing young son. One autumn day, Rasputin was ushered past the gilded gates of Tsarskoe Selo into the presence of the royal family. In the opulent palace salon, Nicholas and Alexandra received an ungainly peasant in a plain robe and muddy boots. Courtiers looked on in disdain, but Alexandra's eyes lit with hope. She was a deeply religious woman, and this starets from Siberia came highly recommended as a man of God. Rasputin made a humble crosswise bow, then boldly took the imperial heir's frail hand. The little boy, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a secret affliction that caused uncontrolled bleeding. Rasputin gazed at Alexei tenderly and murmured a prayer. Alexandra watched, wringing her hands as the wild-looking stranger gently blessed her son. To her astonishment, Alexei's fretful mood seemed to calm, and a rosy flush returned to his cheeks. Nicholas exchanged a glance with his wife. Could this rugged holy man truly have soothed the boy so easily? Alexandra was convinced she had witnessed a miracle, however small. From that moment, Rasputin gained a foothold in the royal circle. The Tsar remained cautious, but the Tsarina embraced Rasputin as a divine messenger sent to safeguard their precious child. The peasant mystic had arrived at court, and nothing would ever be the same. Not long after Rasputin's arrival, the worst fears of the imperial family came true. Young Alexei had a life-threatening bleeding episode. In 1912, while the royal family visited the Polish countryside, the 7-year-old heir fell and developed a massive internal hemorrhage. The boy writhed in agony. His temperature spiked as blood pooled in his joints. Imperial doctors could only look on in despair. By all signs, Alexei was near death. In panic and sorrow, Tsarina Alexandra turned to the only man she believed could save her son, Rasputin. A messenger was dispatched to find the starets. Rasputin, hundreds of miles away in Siberia, received the Tsarina's frantic telegram and replied at once, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. The little one will not die." He implored them not to let the doctors disturb the boy further. That night, as Alexandra kept vigil by her son's bed, Rasputin fell to his knees in prayer far off in his village chapel. Miraculously, by the next morning, Alexei's bleeding stopped. The boy's fever broke. He was weak, but very much alive. The imperial doctors were bewildered. It was as if a hand unseen had healed the child. But Alexandra needed no explanation. In her mind, Father Grigori had interceded with God to spare her son. Rasputin's seemingly supernatural healing power cemented his place at the Romanov court. From then on, he was Alexandra's trusted guardian angel. She wrote in her diary that Rasputin was our friend, sent by God to watch over our boy. Nicholas II, though more reserved, acknowledged the peasant's value in keeping the heir healthy and his wife calm. As Rasputin's influence grew, so did his boldness. He moved freely through the palace, often alone with the empress, offering counsel on matters of faith and even state. The royal family was now enthralled by the healer in their midst. Yet, outside palace walls, rumors were beginning to swirl, whispers that would soon swell into a roar of scandal. With Rasputin's elevated status came temptation and excess. The same man who prayed fervently over the Tsarevich by day was notorious for debauchery by night on the streets of St. Petersburg. We find Rasputin in dim taverns and gypsy tea rooms, downing glass after glass of sweet Madeira wine with admirers at his elbow. His mesmerizing gaze and reputation as the Tsarina's holy favorite drew women of all ranks to him. In private apartments, behind drawn curtains, he held prayer meetings that often turned into sensual revels. Society ladies, desperate for his healing touch or blessing, would fall under the spell of his strange charisma. Rasputin preached a curious theology. To be closer to God, one must first sin and then repent. In practice, this often meant that late-night confessions with female devotees ended in adulterous embraces. By his reasoning, he was liberating these women from their sins by sharing in them, only to guide them back to God's grace. Tales of Rasputin's sexual exploits and drunken antics spread through the capital like wildfire. He was said to have seduced noblewomen, actresses, and even nuns. Darker rumors hinted that he had corrupted the Tsarina herself or her teenage daughters, vile slanders with no basis, yet widely believed by a populace eager to see evil in this peasant interloper. Satirical cartoons in the press showed Rasputin as a devil whispering into Alexandra's ear, or as a puppeteer controlling the Tsar. The image of the mad monk, lustful, unkempt, and wielding unnatural influence, began to crystallize in the public's mind. Within the church and aristocracy, former supporters turned into bitter enemies. One prominent priest who had once endorsed Rasputin now denounced him as the Antichrist. Government ministers who saw their advice overruled by this uncouth holy man seethed with resentment. For all the mystique that kept his devotees loyal, Rasputin was making powerful foes at every turn. And as his list of enemies grew, so did their determination to remove him by any means necessary. Summer 1914, storm clouds of World War I gather over Europe. Rasputin, now a fixture in the royal inner circle, senses catastrophe looming. From his Siberian retreat, he sends an urgent letter to Tsar Nicholas. Do not go to war, it warns. A war with Germany will spell the end of Russia. But Nicholas, facing pressure and patriotic fervor, ignores the mystic's prophecy. In July, the Tsar declares war. As Russian troops mobilize, Rasputin remains at home in Pokrovskoye, recovering from exhaustion in the pressures of court life. Then, on a sweltering day in late June 1914, fate struck. Without warning, a dagger flashed in the summer sun. A radicalized peasant woman named Kionia Guseva lunged at Rasputin outside his own gate. Before he could react, the blade sank deep into his stomach, tearing through intestines. Rasputin screamed and collapsed in the dirt, blood soaking his peasant shirt. Guseva, eyes wild with fanaticism, cried out, "I have killed the devil." Rasputin's neighbors rushed to subdue the would-be assassin as the wounded holy man was carried, gasping and ashen, into his house. For days, Rasputin hovered at the edge of death. Surgeons were summoned to perform emergency operations as he fought peritonitis and massive blood loss. In the palace, Tsarina Alexandra was distraught. She prayed tearfully for the survival of the man she believed God had sent to protect her family. Against all odds, Rasputin clung to life. His recovery was slow and agonizing, but by the fall of 1914, he was on his feet again, an event Alexandra proclaimed a miracle. "God spared our friend," she wrote, convinced more than ever of Rasputin's divine mission, but others saw darker portents. The fact that Rasputin survived the knife that should have killed him only fed the whispers that he was supernaturally protected, that perhaps no mortal weapon could destroy him. Meanwhile, the Great War began devouring Russia's sons by the thousands. By 1915, with battlefield losses mounting, Tsar Nicholas foolishly decided to leave the capital to personally command troops at the front. In his absence, he entrusted domestic affairs to Tsarina Alexandra, who in turn relied utterly on Rasputin's counsel. It was a recipe for disaster, and the ingredients of conspiracy were now falling into place. By late 1916, Russia was bleeding from the war and teetering on the brink of collapse. In the gilded halls of St. Petersburg, Rasputin and Alexandra reigned as virtual co-rulers, while the Tsar remained at military headquarters. Rasputin's influence was at its peak. He intervened in government constantly, urging the Tsarina to dismiss generals and ministers who displeased him and replace them with pliant but often incompetent men. The empire, racked by food shortages and defeats, seemed to be under a malign spell. Many Russians, from commoners to conservative nobles, blamed the dark forces at court, by which they meant the German-born empress and her favorite Rasputin. In the Imperial Duma, parliament, the firebrand deputy Vladimir Purishkevich thundered that the Tsar's ministers had been reduced to marionettes dancing on strings held by Rasputin and the empress. To patriotic Russians, it was intolerable. How could the fate of the nation rest in the hands of a degenerate monk and a Tsarina suspected of German sympathies? In whispers and secret meetings, the cry rose up, Rasputin must die for Russia to live. A core group of aristocrats and relatives of the Tsar decided to act. Leading the plot was Prince Felix Yusupov, a flamboyant young noble married to the Tsar's niece, and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's own cousin. They were joined by Purishkevich and a few military officers. On a cold December night, the conspirators gather in Yusupov's elegant Moika Palace on the Neva River to set their plan in motion. The scene is tense and shadowy. In a lavish wood-paneled drawing room, the prince lays out the final details. Poisoned wine and cakes have been prepared in the cellar. Revolvers are loaded and hidden under coats. They will lure Rasputin to the palace on the pretext of meeting Yusupov's beautiful wife, Princess Irina, for a late-night soiree. The lustful Rasputin cannot resist such an invitation. As midnight approaches on December 29, 1916, a car pulls up to the palace gate. Rasputin emerges, wrapped in a heavy coat, his beard flecked with snow. He has been drinking a bit and is in high spirits, flattered by Prince Yusupov's attention. Yet those close to him recall that in the days prior, Rasputin spoke of a premonition. "I will leave life before January," he had written ominously to the Tsar, warning that if he were killed by boyars, nobles, the royal family would likewise meet its end. Even so, Rasputin strides into Yusupov's mansion, determined to enjoy an evening of pleasure. Unbeknownst to him, his enemies lie in wait just upstairs, hearts pounding with resolve. The trap is set. The mad monk has entered the lair from which he will not escape. Deep in the bowels of the Moika Palace, the final act of Rasputin's life plays out like a macabre thriller. Scene: a dimly lit cellar decorated as a cozy parlor with Persian carpets and low lamps. Prince Yusupov leads Rasputin to a chair and offers him sweet cakes and Madeira wine, apologizing that Princess Irina is delayed upstairs with guests. Rasputin, unaware of the deceit, helps himself. Unseen by Rasputin, each rich pastry and each glass of wine is heavily laced with cyanide. The conspirators upstairs wait breathlessly for sounds of collapse. But as minutes tick by, an uncanny sight meets Yusupov's eyes. Rasputin continues chatting and eating, seemingly unaffected. He even begins to hum a gypsy love song, licking the poisoned crumbs from his fingers. A bead of sweat forms on Yusupov's brow. The poison should have killed 10 men by now, yet Rasputin lounges comfortably, his eyes glinting in the lamplight. Time is running out for the plotter's nerve. Around 2:30 a.m., Yusupov excuses himself and ascends the stairs, where his co-conspirators huddle anxiously. In hushed tones, they agree on the next course. If poison fails, gunfire must do the job. Yusupov grabs a revolver, hands trembling, and returns to the basement. Below, Rasputin rises from his seat, perhaps sensing the prince's strange agitation. Yusupov steadies his aim, the gun hidden behind his back. "Better look at the crucifix and say a prayer," Yusupov mutters, gesturing to a cross on the wall. Rasputin barely has time to furrow his brow in confusion. Bang! The gunshot explodes in the confined room. Rasputin gasps as a bullet strikes him in the chest. He collapses onto a bearskin rug, thrashing and then falling still. Upstairs, the others rejoice. The deed seems done. To be certain, Yusupov approaches the body. Rasputin lies motionless, eyes closed. The prince touches his neck for a pulse. Nothing. Finally, the unkillable Rasputin appears dead. Relieved, the assassins begin to scheme how to cover up the killing. Yusupov remains behind, watching over the corpse while his comrades prepare a car. The silence in the cellar is eerie. Yusupov, overcome by a mix of triumph and dread, shakes Rasputin's body and shouts, "So much for your powers, holy man!" In a flash, Rasputin's eyes snap open. With a demonic snarl, he lunges off the floor and grabs Yusupov by the throat. The prince screams in terror. Rasputin's bloodied face, eyes bulging, looms inches from his own. The dead man is very much alive, roaring with animal fury. Yusupov struggles free and staggers up the stairs, yelling for help. Rasputin, bleeding from his chest wound, drags himself up as well, determined to escape. His assassins cannot believe their eyes when Rasputin stumbles into the snowy courtyard, still alive, blood dripping onto the white snow. In the courtyard darkness, Rasputin croaks a promise into the wind. "I will tell it all to the Tsarina." He has only made it a few steps when Purishkevich raises his pistol and fires again. A shot catches Rasputin in the back, then another misses, and a third bullet strikes his forehead. The mad monk finally crumples to the ground, face up to the night sky. This time, he does not move. Yusupov approaches the body cautiously. The infamous eyes that once charmed an empress now stare blankly, glassy and devoid of life. It took poison, bullets, and sheer brute tenacity to bring him down, but Grigori Rasputin was at last dead. Near 5 a.m., under the cover of the still dark winter morning, the conspirators hastily wrap the corpse in a carpet. They drive to a lonely bridge on the outskirts of the city and heave Rasputin's body through a hole in the ice of the Neva River. As the icy water closes over him, an era of royal intrigue sinks as well. The unkillable monk had finally been killed, or so his assassins believed. Little did they know, the legend of Rasputin was only just beginning. The murder of Rasputin sent shockwaves through St. Petersburg. News of the monk's assassination spread even before his body was found. When Rasputin's corpse was retrieved from the frozen river a few days later, An autopsy showed water in his lungs, sparking lurid speculation that he had still been alive when dumped in the river, desperately breathing even as he drowned under the ice. The authorities, under the Tsarina's grief-stricken orders, buried Rasputin in a small funeral attended by the imperial family. Alexandra clutched her children, distraught that their beloved holy man was gone. In her heart, she feared that Rasputin's chilling final prophecy would come true, that the Romanov dynasty's fate was bound to his own. Indeed, only weeks later, the empire began to collapse. In March 1917, the Tsar was forced to abdicate as revolution swept Russia. One of the new government's first acts was to exhume and destroy Rasputin's remains, lest his grave become a rallying site for monarchist devotees. In a forest outside the city, soldiers dumped Rasputin's body onto a pyre and set it alight. As flames consumed the corpse, eyewitnesses later claimed in horror that Rasputin's body sat upright in the fire. His tendons shrunk by heat, making it appear as if the dead man were rising one last time. The panicked soldiers crossed themselves, certain that Rasputin's malevolent spirit still refused to die. Within 18 months of Rasputin's death, Tsar Nicholas, Alexandra, and all their children were executed by revolutionaries, fulfilling to the letter Rasputin's prophecy that if nobles killed him, the Romanov family would not survive 2 years. History had seemingly vindicated the peasant seer. In the aftermath, Rasputin's name passed swiftly into the realm of legend and cautionary tale. To a Russia that had plunged into chaos and civil war, the story of the mad monk became emblematic of the decadence and doom of the old regime. Over the ensuing century, Rasputin's eerie tale has been retold in countless books, films, and whispered stories. Some cast him as a sorcerer or demon, others as a misunderstood holy man, all fascinated by how he lived and how staggeringly hard he was to kill. His piercing gaze, his alleged powers, and the dramatic arc of his rise and fall have secured him a place in history's gallery of enigmatic figures. In the end, Grigori Rasputin truly earned his title, the man who could not be killed. Though flesh and blood failed him, the legend of Rasputin lives on, immortal and unyielding, refusing to die, just as the man himself had on that fateful winter's night.